Good evening, it's 6:30, and I'd like to call this meeting to order. And the first item on the agenda is executive session. City Council shall convene into closed executive session pursuant to Section 551.071 of the Texas Government Code to confer with the city attorney regarding legal advice related to the status of the 1445 interlocal agreement between the City of Bastrop and Bastrop County for the review of subdivision application in the city's extraterritorial jurisdiction. It is still 6:30, and we are in executive session. Yes, Okay, it's 7:34, and we are now back in regular session. With respect to the executive session, our esteemed city attorney will make a presentation to us on the 1445 interlocal agreement. Mr. Borquez.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. State law requires that cities and counties adopt an interlocal agreement, which is often called a 1445 agreement because that's the House bill number that originally adopted this rule. And the agreement is supposed to delineate who is in charge and responsible for regulating plats in subdivisions and related permits in the ETJ. The city of Bastrop and Bastrop County adopted a 1445 agreement that was adopted in 2006, but it expired under its own terms in 2011. And so the city and county have been progressing since that time as if the agreement was still in full force and effect, and plats have been approved, permits have been issued, and things have moved on. Now that we are in this moratorium, we are addressing the fact that the agreement has expired. And having met and addressed the County Commissioners Court early this week, I've prepared for you a recommended course of action to remedy this as simply and as quickly as possible. Before you is a draft resolution on the 1445 interlocal agreement. And in essence, it does four separate things. First of all, it reauthorizes the current but expired interlocal agreement through the approval of Amendment Number 1. Second of all, it extends the interlocal agreement for a period of 90 days to coincide with the temporary moratorium. Number 3, it adds to the 1445 agreement the requirement that those permit applications that come before the county that are not qualified under the same exceptions that we're currently accepting do two things. Number 1, have a pre-application submission meeting with county officials. And number 2, have those projects present a certification from a licensed engineer that the project will not adversely affect the drainage situation. Those are the same two requirements we've imposed on ourselves for our own permits here at City Hall. And we're basically taking the essence of those two requirements and adding them to the county's administration of plats and related permits in our ETJ. And the fourth thing that the resolution does is it ratifies all of those plats and permits that have been approved by the county in our ETJ since the time the current contract expired. And so if you will consider and approve that resolution, I can then convey that resolution and our assigned amendment over to the county for their consideration and action.
And Alan, my understanding is that should council approve this tonight, we'll sign it, we'll send it to the county, and then they'll have an opportunity to review it, approve it, or if they have any comments, send it back. And it would be our intention, should they have any comments, that we can address those at our council meeting next Tuesday.
Yes, we met with them last Monday, and now they'll have a chance to review it this coming Monday. And if they have any questions, comments, or feedback, y'all can consider that Tuesday night. There'll be an item on your agenda for that.
I certainly appreciate you coming with me to Commissioner's Court on Monday. I appreciate that, and I appreciate how quickly you've prepared this information. Council, do you have any questions? Councilmember Jones, do you have a question? Okay. I'd like to present, to make a motion to approve the 1445 interlocal agreement as presented.
Second.
I have a motion from Councilmember Jones and a second from Councilmember Peterson to approve the resolution for the 1445 interlocal agreement as presented by the city attorney. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, Madam Secretary, if you'll call the roll.
Councilmember Jones.
Yes.
Councilmember Peterson.
Yes.
Councilmember Ennis.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson.
Yes.
And Councilmember Rogers.
Yes. The motion passes unanimously, and we will forward that agreement to the county as soon as possible. Thank you, council, for that vote. We are now moving on to work session item 4A. Consider action to approve the second reading of emergency ordinance number 2018-1 of the City Council of the City of Bastrop, Texas, enacting a temporary moratorium staying the acceptance and processing of certain permits in the city limits and extraterritorial jurisdiction, providing for findings of facts, definitions, applicability, purpose, enactment, duration, extension, exceptions, and exemptions, determination and appeals, repealer, severability, enforcement, effective date, and proper notice and meeting. City Attorney, I believe you have some updates for us, and Council, you have the ordinance in front of you.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, Council. Last week, you approved on first reading a temporary moratorium ordinance adopted under Subchapter E of Local Government Code, Chapter 212. You had a public hearing, there was public notice, and following that, a temporary moratorium went into effect. State statute requires that we have a second reading of that ordinance, and that's what tonight is for. This is our second reading under state law and under our own home rule charter in order to keep the temporary moratorium in place. There's some minor modifications to the moratorium ordinance, a couple of little small procedural matters, some clarifications, another whereas or two with some legislative findings. The substantive difference between this one and the one last week is that we have narrowed down the definition of permit that is covered by the moratorium to exclude certain classifications of permits that I don't think the council ever really intended to include in the moratorium. We define those as trade permits, and it includes such routine matters as electrical, HVAC, mechanical, plumbing, roofing, and irrigation permits. All those being permits that do not affect drainage one way or the other. And so by approving this version of the ordinance tonight on second and final reading, you'll be streamlining the permit process a little bit. And along those lines, I wanted to comment on my behalf and on staff's behalf that we really appreciate the feedback that we've gotten about this moratorium. So far, the feedback that we've received from the public and the regulated community has been very positive. The word moratorium can be kind of a daunting, confusing word, but the city, through its communications team and through you, have helped educate the public about what this moratorium is about and what it's not about. And so we've received a great deal of positive feedback, and I think those in the construction, real estate, and development community have been very forthcoming in reviewing what we've done and offering their insight and their feedback. I think that input's been overwhelmingly positive, and it's been very helpful, because the intention of the City Council is to focus on drainage. How does water flow through this community, and how are our permits and procedures addressing that? And while the moratorium's in place, we're also going to take that opportunity to look at a few other things. The focus of this is health and safety. The focus of this is drainage. And so I think this second version of the moratorium streamlines the permitting approval process even more than it was already. And it's a positive thing that I put before you with staff's recommendation to approve.
Council, do you have any other questions for the attorney? Mayor Pro Tem Nelson?
No questions. I appreciate the speed and clarity that the city attorney is bringing to this process. And with that, I'll move for approval of the second reading of ordinance 2018-01.
Second.
I have a motion from Mayor Pro Tem Nelson and a second from Councilmember Peterson. It's been a long day. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, Madam Secretary, if you'll call the roll.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson.
Yes.
Councilmember Peterson.
Yes.
Councilmember Jones.
Yes.
Councilmember Ennis.
Yes.
Councilmember Rogers.
Yes. Thank you, council. The second and final reading of emergency ordinance number 2018-1 is approved. We're now moving to item 4B, consider action to amend emergency ordinance number 2018-2 of the City Council of the City of Bastrop, Texas, enacting additional requirements mandating data related to drainage and flooding for the acceptance, processing, and approval of certain permits in the city limits and extraterritorial jurisdiction, providing for findings of fact, applicability, purpose, enactment, exemptions, repealer, severability, enforcement, effective date, and proper notice and meeting. Council, you have before you a draft of the amendment to emergency ordinance 2018-2. City Attorney.
Mayor, Council, you also adopted an ordinance last week that required additional obligations for someone applying for a non-accepted permit. That being that they have a pre-application conference with city staff, and also that they submit with their application a certification from a licensed professional engineer attesting to the fact that the proposed project will not adversely affect the drainage situation in the community or on neighbors. You were able to adopt that on one reading and one reading only because it was an emergency ordinance that did not impose a fine or a penalty. We're bringing this back to you as a slight amendment and requesting that you approve it. One reason that this amendment is necessary is we also needed to address the definition of permits in this document, as we did in the moratorium, to exempt trade permits. We're not meant to be captured by that. There's a few other small clarifications in there. For example, when we talk about the exception for no impact projects, one of the factors was no increase in density. We clarified that that's meant to be horizontal density. And also for ongoing projects, it means that they not only have gotten their approvals, but construction is active and ongoing, which is what we meant all along. But in dealing with property owners and developers who have come forward the last week, it became clear that we needed to clarify that so as not to catch permits in this net that we didn't intend to do so. So today you have an amendment to the ordinance and you're allowed to approve it under your charter on one reading only, and that's staff's recommendation.
Council, do you have any further questions for the city attorney?
I'd like to make a motion to approve this, excuse me, this amendment.
I have a motion from Councilmember Ennis to approve emergency ordinance number 2018-2, the amendment to that ordinance, and I have a second from Mayor Pro Tem Nelson. Is there any further discussion? I would make the note that both this ordinance and the emergency ordinance 2018-1, with these approvals that we are doing, that I assume we're going to do tonight, whatever is the latest and greatest will be uploaded on our website. So if you're at home and you're wanting to know what is the piece of paper that we're looking at, we will get that posted as soon as we get things signed and get things taken care of. But I just want to make sure that we know we're being transparent, and we'll get that updated for everyone. Councilmember Jones?
I just wanted to say how much I appreciate our attorney and staff working together to get this clarification for the public.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Madam Secretary, if you'll call the roll.
Councilmember Ennis,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson,
Yes.
Councilmember Rogers,
Yes.
Councilmember Peterson.
Yes.
Councilmember Jones.
Yes. The motion passes unanimously. The amendment to emergency ordinance 2018-2 is approved. Thank you, council, for the unanimous approval. We're now on to item 4C, consider action and approve resolution number R2018-68 of the City Council of the City of Bastrop, Texas, making determinations regarding certain project-specific exceptions and or exemptions as provided by emergency ordinance 2018-1, section 8. Ms. Bills is going to make a presentation to us, but I want to make a clarification for the public. The verbiage that you see in item 4C, we will have as an item on all of our agendas moving forward during this moratorium, and it will allow the expeditious approval, and even if we don't approve, getting an answer. For a lot of times, not having an answer is what is the most costly thing. So tonight and tonight only, Jennifer is going to present to us the exceptions, because by definition of the ordinance, the exceptions can be done by staff. Staff will take care of them. They will be posted on our website, and what we will be considering in the future, and we would, except we didn't have any to consider tonight, will be exemptions. And I want to clarify, I think, I know council and many of the folks in the community have grown to respect and appreciate the agenda packets that we put together, and they are used to seeing all of the backup information included in the packet. For this item only, there may not be anything in the agenda packet, and we are doing that because if we require it to be in the agenda packet, it could be an onerous process for our developers, that they would have to have things presented 10 days in advance, and we could be delaying them, where if we know if we're going to be reviewing the exemption, they're going to have to produce the information and make a presentation anyway. So we just want the public to not be expecting something in the packet. It's a one-time exception. It's the way you handle things when you're in an emergency situation, to make sure that we are able to, in the most expeditious manner possible, continue to approve things for our development community. And for some of our individual citizens, if there's a reason that they would need an exemption on a small lot, all of those will be handled by council. And with that, Ms. Bills, I know it has been a busy 10 days as you've met with developers and individual property owners, and we're happy to hear what things you and your staff have been able to complete.
Sure. So what I was going to go over just kind of generally right now is the process for applying for the exemption or an exception under the moratorium. We've distilled down the language that's in the ordinances, and we've actually created two application processes for people to formally ask either for an exception or an exemption. To date, we have been working on some exceptions already, projects that are currently in our processes that we know for a fact, because they're in our processes, that they qualify for exceptions. We have been issuing letters to developers, especially the first one was Pecan Park, because they are very actively building. They're turning in new home permits every day to us. They're considered an exception under the moratorium because they have both ongoing projects that have currently received permits that are active and moving forward, and they also meet some of the grandfathering requirements for some of their sections, that they've gotten the first permit in a series of permits approved, so they can continue on to the next. So if they've already had their preliminary plat approved and they could turn in their final plat in the time frame dictated by the code, they can continue to move through the process all the way to their building permits for those sections. So that's generally the exception process. There's three categories that someone can apply for an exception under the moratorium. And once they do that, that means they do not have to have the pre-submission meeting with us or do the certification by an engineer. So the first is a no-impact project. So these are projects that are not going to impact drainage. Some examples are if you're building over already impervious cover, if you already have your slab down, or you're downtown rebuilding a building that's already over a foundation that's been there, you're not going to be impacting drainage. There is no more ground to cover. Or you're doing potentially fences could be a drainage problem. They may not. So an applicant would submit that to us, and we would go review those particular cases to determine if there is going to be an impact to drainage, and if there's not, it can be considered a no-impact project.
So if we have any citizens out there that have some concern, the main thing they need to do is file the application, and staff will work with them, and they may very well be a no impact, but staff will help them determine that.
Yes.
Okay.
So that's the first category under the exceptions. The second is an ongoing project. So an ongoing project is a project that already has received its permit, and the permit is not expired, and they're continuing to work through that, what's allowed under the permit. So one example, Piney Creek Bend has already started construction on their phase one. Phase one is an ongoing project. They're putting in the streets, they're putting in the water lines. We're not going to stop that. They're continuing every day to build that project out. So the ongoing projects are considered an exception, and we've been working to get letters out to those people because we're out there every day inspecting them. We know they're ongoing. And then the third is grandfathered projects. And so this is we're terming them grandfathered. It's a specific section of the local government code that governs when you have a vested interest or enough of an intent in a project that you can be considered grandfathered. And this one sometimes may take a little bit more time and require additional information from an applicant to be provided to us to make that determination if they are considered a grandfathered project. So these are ones that may have a plan development district that has specific agreements that were made in it, other development agreements in the city or the ETJ, or preliminary plats that were filed in the last 2 years that have been making progress. All those can be considered grandfathered projects. And those may take a little bit more staff time and research to determine their status. So for all three of these, if there's a question and staff cannot approve their exception, they'll be forwarded to City Council for your review and determination if there's a chance that they could be considered an exception and not denied. So that's what will be coming as we run across those cases that we cannot approve. We'll be bringing those forward on this agenda item. So the second category is exemptions. And this one is a process that will take a little longer. And this is for brand new projects that don't fit one of these categories under the exceptions. So the first step of the exemption process is to have a pre-submission meeting with staff, which includes the planning department, the public works department, and the engineering department. Once that meeting's held, they can submit their application for the exemption, and they can start into the process that staff worked out with them. There's 4 different methods underneath the exemption that they can go through to get approval from City Council to continue on. The first is a planned development district, which is a zoning category that they will be able to define their lot standards, their road standards, and provide specific drainage information to show how they're really going to go above and beyond our current standards to not affect downstream flows. The second is alternative design standard, and this is not something we currently have. This is a new process with this moratorium, and what we envision that's going to be applied to is site plans or building permits. So you don't need to plat, but you do need to design your site to show how you're not going to be impacted by drainage. So either through your building permit or through the site plan, you're going to work with staff to define what standards you're using on your site to address drainage. And some of those things could be alternative pavement standards, landscaping. We were kind of throwing out some ideas of different things that would work for that. And people can propose how that's going to address it, and council will be able to approve those methods. The third is an ETJ development agreement, which also considers consent agreements for the municipal utility districts in our ETJ. And this is a negotiated agreement with a developer that is looking to do a subdivision in the ETJ. And then the last is a waiver. And so this is a requirement in the local government code that if the applicant is willing to pay for all of the drainage improvements that are necessary to provide for the drainage to his property and outside of his property, then they can propose to do those improvements and then move ahead with their project. So as we move forward, we'll be bringing those to council for consideration.
Council, any questions for Ms. Bills?
So
Councilmember
is
Jones?
there like a flow chart or a cover sheet that's on your site or in your office where you have these definitions so people can kind of?
Yes, we have on the Building Bastrop website, we've uploaded the checklists and the process that show, so that the both applications have the overview of the process, and then the checklists define the specific elements that need to be turned in for each item.
The other thing I'd like to remind the public is that we are having meetings on Thursdays at 9 o'clock. I hosted the first meeting. Mayor Pro Tem Nelson hosted the second meeting this this being the second Thursday after the moratorium was adopted, and we will be holding those every Thursday. So if people have additional questions or if they want some clarification, that's a time when staff will be available. We also want to remind everyone about our Building Bastrop website, and we have an email account and a hotline. So we would encourage folks, we've had some people already taking advantage of that, and we appreciate that. And in fact, some of that input is how we've come up with our process and made some of our revisions that we made tonight. So we really appreciate the development community and our own citizens being a part of that. And we really look forward to both the developers and our own citizens being a part of updating our land use regulation ordinances that we're working on, all those codes, working on that, and there'll be additional information coming out. I know we've already announced the first public meeting that we're having on September 18th at 6:30 over at the Convention Center, but we're all going to get to know each other a whole lot better with the public, and we sure appreciate their participation. So, Ms. Bills, based on the two documents that we have approved tonight, you have approved some exceptions, and I believe they were done just in the last couple of hours. So you'll be notifying folks and putting those on the website?
Yes, we're putting, as the letters go out, we're putting them on the website, who's received those exceptions, and we'll be working through those over the next several days to get all the ones we know about out, and then as people apply through the exception process, and because there are some of those projects that maybe have been in the process long before I got here that I don't know about that are grandfathered, that someone will have to provide me with some information to make sure I can look them up and
so for
provide the
clarity,
letter.
if it is an exception, and you talked about those, the no impact and the grandfathered or the ongoing, as soon as you've made those determinations, and if it's a yes, they will be posted on the website and you are notifying the applicant. If it's an exemption, only council can approve those exemptions, and council, we can expect that we could have an exemption possibly at our next council meeting. And then once council has made a decision, then those also will be posted on the website.
Yes.
Councilmember Ennis?
I'd like to compliment the city manager and all of the staff for the tremendous amount of work that's gone into all of this, and of course, Mr. Bajorquez, who's been our mainstay, and our folks who have been helping us with our presentation of this, the Bowie and Company. And I think council really appreciates all of the hard work.
I appreciate that and will acknowledge it's great teamwork, but there are two ladies that really do a ton of work, and that is Allison and Jennifer. And they've been up here 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, midnight since this happened to get all of this in the box. So they've got a great cast of team support, but I want to make sure that everybody appreciates Jennifer and Allison because they are toting the freight.
And being the engineer, we cannot leave out our city engineer, because I've left and Mr. Pallady is still here and still working hard, and he's got a few other things going on in his life too as he moves to Bastrop. And I know there's been roofs over pools and everything else, and you have taken care of all of it, and we absolutely appreciate you being part of the team. So personally and from council, thank you very much. Mayor Pro Tem, were you going to?
I had a couple of questions, one for Ms. Bills and one for the city attorney. I know we're just 9 days in, but have there been any requests for exemptions so far?
Not yet, no.
Okay.
But we have discussed with several of the developers that want to move forward with new projects what their process will be, and we'll be working with them to help them through that.
And for the city attorney, on this item, where we're going to bring it forth at every council meeting, is there any need to suspend the rules based upon our earlier action on our rules of order?
I'm not sure what the question is about. I'm not that familiar with the
Do we have to
rules of order.
suspend the rules because we're not going to have it in the agenda packet, and we know we're not doing it on this one item?
Then yes, that'd be a good idea. You may do that at each meeting when you have those. This time, we don't have any to offer you, but in the future, yes.
Okay, thank you.
So we may put that verbiage in the agenda that we're suspending
That's
the
a good
rules on
idea.
that one item. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Nelson.
Good idea.
Parliamentarian, detail-oriented guy that you are. Any other questions? Mr. Peterson, do you have anything you would like to I think you have one motion.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
It is 8:03 and we are adjourned. Thank you, council, for your time.